Hi, everyone. I am taking a different format today to have my friend Lorca Smetana join us for a conversation entitled Looking to the Future, Permaculture and Resilient Life Practices. And I have her on because I've been talking a lot through my newsletter and just talking with clients a lot about resilience and cultivating resilience. And we often, again, think about that at a landscape level of how to build a more self-reliant life by growing more of our own food, by being connected to the natural world. But as I've talked about before, a lot of the permaculture principles and practices can be applied at the social realm, which is where Lorca shines. So I thought I'd have her on kind of interview style format, and we're going to see where this conversation goes. So Lorca, I'd love it if you started out by introducing yourself and a little bit, tell us a little bit about what you do and some of your background.
Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here today with Kareen. We've been talking about this stuff for a long, long time. And where I come in to meet Kareen is that I work with the human side of this mostly. So I teach up at Montana State University. I work with organizations. I work with workers and families who have the opportunity to take some of these ideas that nature is operating with to create a workable system that lasts through millennia. And how do we apply some of these concepts? How do we use some of the same structures and ways that are so beautifully efficient and efficiently beautiful that we can do what we want to get done with a lot more ease than we're used to. So that's where I'm coming in.
Yeah, great, Lorca. And I think we've started this conversation, I don't know, maybe a couple years ago, just about resilience thinking and how so much of permaculture so many permaculture principles can be applied at the social realm. But I even think now it's even more relevant in terms of how do we come out of this whole pandemic? How do we come out of this crisis that we've been in? And so I keep on coming back to permaculture principles and have during this time because they're so applicable and because they're based in natural systems. So, I think about the permaculture principle of observe and interact, or self-regulate and accept feedback. Or designing from patterns to details, all of those things kind of, and how they can be applied on a social level in terms of how we design our lives better and how we can cultivate that inner resilience to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes, or even ones where we're asking ourselves, how do we stop designing for waste into production, getting rid of waste, creating more production, but rather build cyclical systems that are constantly feeding our own lives as we go, so that we are left with abundance when we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what's so interesting, I feel like, about the permaculture realm is you can apply those things on a landscape level and they make a lot of sense. But then when you start talking in the social realm, it resonates with people, but they've just never thought of it that way, I think. Right. So I can explain to clients or to students, yeah, this is how you produce no waste on your property, and you don't want to export, stuff away from your property, and you want to be very careful that over time you have less and less inputs that come on your property because you're growing your fertility, or you're growing biomass to make sure your soil is okay. And I'd love it if you talked a little bit more about how that can be applied in the social realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my tendency is to start even in the personal realm and then to go out to the social realm. So what comes to the idea first when you talk about that particular principle is the concept of how do we change the inputs that we as humans need just to exist, just to be, right? So a parallel, I think, that could be very easily made here is asking ourselves, how much just to get through a day are we needing to bring in a whole lot of fertilizers and moisture and into a life? And what I'm thinking of is, how much do I need to fill in my day with music? How much do I need to fill it with screen time? How much can I tolerate silence? How much can I tolerate stillness, right? And so here we're actually looking at having created in ourselves, as ourselves, environments that need all of this input all the time just to feel normal, right? So that, I mean, this is a very ground level way of being. And fortunately, it's one that is really easy to experiment with, right? By turning things off, right? By sitting still, by lessening just as a dosage, right? Not getting rid of all of this stuff, not joining a monastery right now, but by testing, right? Like putting your phone away, not taking your music into the garden, and testing what happens if you lessen the input. And essentially what we're doing here is we're doing little dopamine fasts, so that neurologically it doesn't take very long. It only takes a matter of a few days, or even several times, during the week, to lessen our reflexive grab for these kinds of things. And us, just like in a garden, a system that needs constant input all the time just to feel okay, that's not very resilient. That's not sustainable, because all of those things could be taken away, right? Any one of them. And so doesn't mean we have to do without or deprive ourselves, but it's a matter of saying, what does it look like to be well independently of the circumstances? So that's what shows up for me there.
When you think about, say, a food forest system, that what you're trying to create is a self-maintaining, self-renewing, self-perpetuating system. And that's kind of what we're trying to do on an inner level. But what's also coming up for me is that whole principle of observing yourself. And of course, we don't take enough time to do that either, because of all of these distractions. And also that idea of simplifying. I think that a more resilient life is one that's simpler, that we have gotten caught up in 20 to 50 different distractions through the day, or we've gotten caught up in this whole idea of how productive and efficient we need to be. And we've forgotten some of the little stuff that brings us back to center.
Yeah. I find the question of density very interesting when it comes to resilience, in that it is some of the healthiest ecosystems, for example, that we look at. They're an incredible density and diversity. And this to me is possible because you have intertwining supports, right? So all of this density and diversity of organisms are feeding each other and supporting each other in so many ways. And so that kind of density isn't fragile. But if those supports aren't in play, then the density is problematic, because if you talk to an engineer, for example, anything that is really tightly packed is rigid and fragile, right? And if you have something super tightly packed and you hit it from the outside, those cracks are going to extend all the way through the whole system, as opposed to a system that has more play in it, right? If there's going to be the possibility of some kind of disruption somewhere around the edges that still allows the whole to maintain its integrity and maintain its functionality. And I find this completely true in the social world and in the human world, because, for example, if you have the life of someone who has no tolerance or no built-in for transitions, right, into a calendar, then there's a crack. You know, the first time someone's late in the morning, that crack is going to go right through into your next appointment, and you're going to be late the entire day. So a calendar that is too tightly packed is a fragile system, right? A human life of friendships where you have to be with people all the time, and have that interaction all of the time is fragile, because there's never any space for that quiet listening, where your own system is telling you what it needs, and asking you to listen. So that kind of taking a look at where we can add space is very often one of the very first things that I do with someone, to help them say, oh, here's a place where I have been asking too much of myself, cramming too much in, tightening too much, expecting too much. And without even telling them how to do this, people are very clear about where to start. But the loveliest thing about it is that it almost doesn't matter. The act of adding the space is what adds health and freedom right there. And things will rise to the surface that just didn't even have existence before. My mother used to live on a nature conservancy island. And part of what they were doing was restoring it to its health, right, to a previous level of health. And she would go out sometimes and clear away some of the brush that was non-native, you know, the snowberries and things. And she'd go out there a few weeks later, and there would be orchids that had showed up just because they had some sunlight on the earth, right? She didn't plant them. She didn't have to do anything. And I see this happening in our lives so beautifully.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think about an expression in permaculture. It's not the amount of elements that you have in a system that make it resilient, but the connections between them, you know, just in terms of creating networks of beneficial relationships, both between plants and between people, that make it resilient. That if you have a bunch of people that aren't connected, well, that's not a resilient system. Same with if you don't have elements that are connected and interact with one another in any way, that's also not a resilient system. So again, it's quality over quantity, you know, and the ability to, again, that creatively use and respond to change, which is a permaculture principle as well, that allows you to do that. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah.
I was thinking about something that happened in my life recently, where one of my dearest friends moved away, and which was sad for me, really great for her, and but it highlighted something for me, a fragility, let's say, in that I realized that in some ways, because of who she was, she had functioned as a hub, and then her friendships would go out from there, right? So there was a hub with a ring, and then I would, through connecting with her, I would sometimes connect with the other people in her ring, right? And so, but if she disappears, right, then I actually have suffered a loss of a number of other humans. And so one of the things that I've consciously done since then is deliberately reach out into that, so that I can strengthen those relationships, not because I want to become the new hub, but also if I do it in such a way where I not only meet with these people, but I'm bringing us together and triangulating, right? So that I can actually repair and reaffirm in ways that actually want to happen by themselves, right? Not forcing it, but I'm inviting this web to reform and re-strengthen and shift around that piece that is not there, or that's changed in how it's there, right? So this is something that we can consciously do with neighbors,
Mm-hmm.
right? I treasure the relationships and deliberately feed the relationships I have with my neighbors, partly because it makes me feel good, but also partly because I think of it as a very clear way of tending my children.
Mm.
That if I'm gone away from the farm and something happens, then they are known to and known by um, our neighbors, and they can feel safe and comfortable making a phone call, running over there, saying, "This happened," and vice versa. That our neighbors can call me and say, "Do you know anybody who does gravel, or who plows, or who has goats, or any of these things?" And the systems are already in place if a crisis comes, so that we don't find ourselves trying to problem solve in our worst moments.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing that nature is really beautiful at.
Yeah, and what I love about your work too is there's an intentionality to it, right? Like and same within permaculture, right? There's an intentionality to design, and it's not that we don't do some of those things anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot, they talk about permaculture being a lot of common sense, right? So it's not that
Yeah.
we don't do those things anyway, but I think lending a certain intentionality to your life, to cultivating your inner resilience, to designing your site or your property just makes it that much stronger.
Yeah. I can very clearly say that that's my entry point into being a resilience expert.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I was I experienced as a teenager a complete fracture of life,
Mm-hmm.
and I lost people in an accident, and all of us in our small community and then in the larger community were deeply and irrevocably affected.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, when you're in that kind of a hard, dark place, your only job is just to get back out, right? That's your first job. But life keeps lifing at you and around you, and I realized fairly quickly after that first event that um, that wasn't going to be the only event. I was going to have to get not only good at getting out of this, but good at getting out of things in general. I wanted to be one of those people who was really good at that, good at re-strengthening, good at reestablishing new life, good at um, going from being a victim to a survivor to a leader
Mm-hmm.
again and again, if that's what it took.
Mm-hmm.
And so asking, what are the qualities, right? What are the skills? What are the habits? What are the ways of being, so that I will never find myself at the bottom of a hole and empty handed ever again? And that by extension, that the communities that I'm in are stronger. The families that I'm part of are going to be glad to have me in them. And that's love, that's responsibility, that's morality for me. That's what I owe anything that I care about, is to be as well as I possibly can, and to be a beautiful node in the webs that I am.
It's so interesting because I think that's that whole, in the context of, ecological principles of, soil is the foundation of your garden, and starting by cultivating that. And if that's right, then your vegetables thrive or your fruit trees thrive. But if you get that wrong or that's off, you're constantly having to kind of do a band-aid approach to trying to fix it. And I feel like as human beings, if we don't, if we're not intentional about cultivating that foundation, that
Yeah.
anything that we do can easily throw us off course in moments of crisis.
Yeah. That makes me think, I'm loving this, because when I think about healthy soil,
Mhm.
and I think of about the, the billion creatures that are in a square foot, say,
Yeah.
right? And their well-being is completely uh, relevant to the nature of the carrots, the nature of how well the forage is doing for our sheep,
Mhm.
and at the same time, if we're making this shift into a human life, right, we could even say to ourselves, okay, well, if I'm taking that kind of level of responsibility for my soil, then what is the multiplicity, I mean, the mind-blowing multiplicity that is in me, right, that I'm equally responsible to and equally already existing in the results of the health of my microbiome, in the health of the billion neurological connections that are in my nervous system, right? And so that's a really, I think, a lovely way we can start to look at trauma, right? Because if something weird happens in your land, right? Let's say you bought a piece of land and there was some kind of toxic battery dump in a corner. You're
Mhm.
like, okay, that's not going to be a useful thing going through forward, right? And you could be kind of crabby about it, but you give yourself like a little bit of time to bitch at it, and then you're like, okay, now what? Like, now what do we do? And I think when we look at trauma in ourselves, or trauma that extends through generations in a family, it is so easy to get stopped into judgment and blame and shame. And these slow the whole process down. It's not that they couldn't be, things won't happen. But if we can treat trauma in ourselves, right? If we have something hurtful that we never allowed ourselves to feel, if we um, weren't able to value ourselves enough to remove ourselves from damaging situations, no further harm, then if we can look at that with the same kind of uh, curiosity and um, creative problem-solving mind that we would bring to a piece of land that needs care, right? Then I think we take action quicker, and we are more innovative, and we think out of the box faster, and we do it because the whole system is related to each other. So the level of health that I can nurture in my own history, right, which is carried completely in my nervous system, my muscles, my fascia, right, it's right there. That's affecting how I parent.
Mhm.
That's affecting who I am when I walk into a classroom up on campus. And so I owe it to the teacher I intend to be and the parent that I am committed to being, to get that stuff figured out,
Mhm.
right? And then to do some active work, and not just saying, time will eventually, maybe, hopefully,
Sort it out.
take care of this, right? Rain will eventually wash all of those toxins away. You're like, yeah. But I want more richness than that sooner.
Mm.
And sometimes that it means doing the hard work of either, shoveling a whole lot of toxic dirt, or being willing to lovingly and patiently, within good space, take a look at the hard things and have hard conversations and be with difficulty as long as it takes to get clean.
And what's interesting actually about what you mentioned is that I, this is part of the issue, right, with how we steward or haven't stewarded land, where we look at a piece of property or a site and we're like, how can I manipulate this to do what I want it to do? And this is not right, and I got to fix this, and all of this stuff has to happen immediately, and I'm impatient about it. And we do the same thing to ourselves. And the practice there, of course, is that on the land you have to have patience, and change takes time, and same with, on a personal level. Uh, and just kind of recognizing how we've been socialized in a way to kind of not harmonize with natural patterns, not understand that what we're doing is the long game, and instead we want those quick fixes, both on a personal level and on a landscape level. I want my cherries immediately, so I'm going to buy like a $300 tree that's balled and burlapped and the roots are all, contained, and I'm going to put it in the ground so that I can have cherries this year, rather than, getting a bare root fruit tree and waiting for 5 years, but that tree, doesn't go through as much transplant shock, is far healthier, has a good foundation, and is going to grow to be a much stronger tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, if you do that way and you are designing for some time like that, then you're also likely planting things around that tree that will support it and that it will support. And so that if you have given yourself that gift of some time, which again is another form of space, right?
Mm-hmm.
that at the end of that time, you'll have, again, another microsystem that is all interfeeding to each other, and which will then not only exist longer, probably, but exist in health longer. So, I mean, I think of resilience as designing for wellness through time.
I love that.
Yeah. And go ahead. Yeah, I'll come back to that.
Yeah, designing for wellness through time. And I mean, I think about that a lot. Just, I say it all the time, we're in the long game,
Yeah.
and so if we understand that we're in the long game, then we can have patience with ourselves and with the land. But we have had the society itself has been such short-term thinking. It's really hard to quiet ourselves and get back to that.
Yeah. Taking those dopamine breaks is a really great little mini experiment in experiencing, even on a very small scale, right? In experiencing the longer game. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Not instantly reaching for something, just like even if you took 5 minutes before you reached, your system is going to respond differently to that. And over time, you actually need less. It's a loveliness, though, that, and it's ironic that by the more layers of permaculture that are integrated. So, for example, some of the older permaculture gardens that have been put into place, I moved here from Orcas Island over 20 years ago, and they have one of the oldest permaculture gardens out there. And so what's special, and which again translates straight into humans, is that the more layers of health that you add in, you actually can experience very rapid results. So, because I think they call it the pop, right, in permaculture, this idea that the first changes that you make, they happen at about the speed you might think, right? And some of the changes you're not going to see, and for years. But as you make some of these changes, you have more, for example, more moisture naturally going where it needs to go, plus nutrients that are going exactly where they need to go, plus protective spaces that develop microclimates. So all of a sudden, things that are growing have exactly what they need, with less and less over time, less and less work from you, right? So you have more happening at greater speeds with greater ease. And so by the time you've invested in these kinds of things for a little while, you're having very rapid, easy results, which you had to take that step. You had to make those commitments in the first place to get there. But I think it's so important to recognize that both with resilience and with permaculture and with our land and with our bodies and with our communities, there is no sacrifice. We are not we are not giving up. I don't think we're not giving up anything.
Mm.
We're not giving up anything, and we are gaining finally the things that we've been stopping ourselves from getting and being frustrated at, wondering how come it's not working, because I'm working so hard.
Mm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I find it such a beautiful pathway to suddenly finding that I am getting what I really want, what I've always somehow wanted and not, and been frustrated in sometimes, and that there's a lightness and an ease and a fun and a curiosity the further I get in. And ultimately, because of all of those things, there's a great deal of peace.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually that's something that, I can sense in you now, right? Or in the times when we have been able to meet in person, you know, there's a calmness there.
Those good times.
Yes. Remember those times? There's a calmness there. And I think you can sense it in people that have, their center. And it usually comes from, it's typically older people that have some life experience, and know, have figured out what's important, I guess, as well. So I was wondering if you could share, and we've talked about this before, this whole idea of the tarn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the tarn is essentially, functionally, it's a mirror. It is a way of taking your life, as it like a snapshot, for example. If I was going to evaluate your life right now and say, based on this particular mirror, using this lens, this is how things are going for you right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it's a very interesting and useful lens, because it doesn't, I think sometimes when we look at our whole life, we say to ourselves, it's doing well if I am not in a lot of pain, if I'm not grieving, if I don't hate a lot of things, right? Those might be criteria, right? And so for quality of life, right? So instead, actually, I'm just going to talk you through it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead, and you can close your eyes or not,
Mm-hmm.
but soften your gaze. And I'd like you to pretend that you are a lake, a beautiful mountain lake. You might picture one in your mind, or you might have a memory of one if you've climbed up into the mountains and come up over a little ridge, and all of a sudden it's just laying out in front of you. It's just exquisite life, because billions of years ago, a glacier filled a ship that gradually started to fill with water, with moisture, and it filled from the glacier that's higher up, and it fills from millennia of rain and snow, and then there are springs that could be coming up from inside the mountain and adding more moisture, and then the more moisture there is, the more life. So you have algae, and you have lichen, and then you start having plants, and you have underwater plants, and trees and shrubbery and bushes and berries, and with all of this comes animal life, and you have insects that you might get fish, and you have birds that come back again and again, and elk and pikas, and a whole micro environment of microscopic creatures that are feeding all of the other ones. And there's no effort on the part of the lake, right? The lake just is what it is, and by being what it is and having really clear water, clear air, by being really a beautifully healthy environment, that life just wants to be there with it. And it comes and it stays, and it comes and goes and comes back. Over time, it just continues to exist and exist and exist, and add more and more layers and layers of diversity, more and more layers of health. And this is a brilliant and living system that you can just feel how, when you are at your best, that life happens beautifully within and around you, that the fun and the joy and the creativity and the purpose that moves in and out of you are feed each other, right? And when you are well, then this is when it's really amazing to be parented by you, to be mentored by you. And you can register that some of the components of this system that that we can recreate, that we can evaluate in our own lives, but then deliberately, consciously feed are, you notice that this lake is fed from many directions, right? That if it only was fed from one input, if that input dries up, then there's severe sin. So asking yourself, how many directions am I fed from in my life right now? Am I nourished in many ways from the outside, from different directions? Am I nourished from my own ideas and my plans and my dreams and my memories, from the inside, and from a kind of let's just call it that kind of inner peace, that calm, right? And do I tend to these areas? And you can ask yourself, what's happening with everywhere where I'm feeding out, right? Am I feeding out in a million directions? And is that sustainable based on how much is coming into me? Do I need to do a little bit of land work here? Can I temporarily create some dams to not pour out so much for a little while and see if that helps how the whole system is doing? Can I see if there are some ways in which I can support being supported in? What's my water quality right now? Is it sparkly and clear and amazing at this moment? Is it muddy? Is there a lot of gunk on the surface, but basically clear underneath? Or is it clear and sparkly on top, but there's some things waiting underneath that might show up later that maybe I want to take a look at now while I'm feeling pretty full, right? And lastly, just asking yourself right now, if I know where my water quality is, and if I know what my current water level is, what's the trajectory of that level, right? Am I pretty full, but it's gradually heading down? Because that's not sustainable. And maybe I want to do something. Am I empty but filling? Am I taking care of everything that is in my power to feed the health of this system? And that every time that I ask these kinds of questions of myself, that a lot of other people's problems solve themselves, right? That my children are off balance and I can pour all my energy into trying to fix them or fix their lives, but that's not actually my job. My job is to be a beautiful system that nourishes them to create their own changes that they need to. And the same goes for my students, and the same goes for my marriage. And it really turns the idea of selfishness that a lot of people feel on its head. Because to my mind, the selfish thing that you can do is to damage this lake. Because if you are damaging your lake and hoping that nobody is noticing, then you are wrong.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that analogy. I think it resonates with me, and I think it resonates with so many people because, again, on that landscape level or ecologically, you understand what an ecosystem needs for health. Yeah. And when you apply it to your own system, then it makes a lot of sense. But if you don't view it through that lens, then often you do think that you're selfish, or you do kind of beat yourself up, like, what's wrong with me? oh, it's because I'm not getting those inputs that I need to function. And what I love about that approach too, and just again, the work that you do is it is about whole systems, and again, in permaculture, it's whole systems design. Um, and I do feel like the human system is something where permaculture is kind of extending into that realm, but that field is so vast and so complex.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's where I think the work that you do can be applied so beautifully to what permaculture is trying to do. And I also feel like it's that whole kind of one thing feeding the other, where by having a garden, by interacting in your space, by interacting with plants, not only does it build that inner resilience because, you're outside and you're, building your own self-reliance or growing some of your own food, but then it gives you also this opportunity to learn from those systems.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm on a farm and we have, I don't know, probably 15 odd species, not counting the microbial ones. There are a lot of animals, a lot of birds, a lot of different kinds of things. And over the years where I have developed into getting very good at having, say, a company or an organization pull that level of vitality into itself and how to identify where problems are, or a family, or excuse me, all of the innovations that have showed up for me on this front that I then integrate in. These things aren't coming from finding other resilience specialists and learning about them. Almost all of them, I probably could say, have come from looking at something when I'm hiking, or looking at how the ducks are in relationship to the pigs, or looking at how my children are in relationship to, the lamb, or looking at what happens in a corner of my garden, and just being so curious, right? Mm-hmm. What is this interaction that just happened, and how come this is amazing? Like, what caused that health? What caused that speed and ease of well-being? And so by learning, the more I learn about biology, the more I learn about geology, the more I come right back out and walk into an organization the next day and be like, we're going to talk about circs. We're going to talk about beavers. Beavers have a lot to teach us.
They're like, who is this person?
Now we're going to talk about dams and raising the table. How can we raise the water table in this organization so that you guys don't have to work so hard to have a level of communication that feels easy, right? And those kinds of changes last.
Yeah. And I think it is, again, it comes back to that that observation piece. I think about that a lot in permaculture, and thoughtful and protracted observation, and for yourself, for your organization, and then being able to apply those natural systems to how we function as human beings, because we are, as Penny Livingston Stark likes to say, we are nature working. We're not apart from it, but we forget that we are part of it.
Well, what if here in quarantine, what if parents living with teenagers said, you know what, there's this situation that I'm noticing, and it's not a one-off, it's a pattern. Right? And what if they said, you know what, I'm going to take 4 days to just notice all the elements of this. What's happening with this boy, right? What's happening? What's the nature of this unfolding, right? And when does it happen, and how does it show up, and when is it exacerbated, and just not do anything. not fix, not leap in, not jump, right? Just watch, and not even necessarily ask, but listen,
Mhm.
right? And then from there, maybe the next step is listening some more, but maybe asking open-ended questions at that point, or saying, not you are like this, but saying, I noticed this, and then being quiet again,
Mm.
see what happens. And there could be some fascinating solutions that show up to an imbalance somewhere, right? That actually come from within him as well as from you, right? And that's effort that you didn't have to spend inventing, and most likely it's effort that you didn't have to spend fixing the wrong thing first and then coming back, right? If that's even possible at that point. So I mean, just that's that's genius, right?
Yeah. And I think
That
it's back to that, looking at the cause rather than the symptom, and really getting quiet rather than rushing to fix something. And sadly, I think that's why so many of our young people are on medication,
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
because people are rushing to fix something, rather than understanding that this is a whole person here and a lot is going on. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, so many lessons in that. And that you know again, like on a landscape level, the solutions can present themselves if you spend enough time observing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, rather than rushing to judgment and figuring out.
Hmm.
Just before this, I came from working with a client, and we're trying to determine where her food forest is going to be. And it's been back and forth. And, I think she wanted to, this year, they recently moved on to the property in February, and she wanted to come up with a map, of her site, of where everything's going to be, and I think I
Yeah.
convinced her through through this process that it would be beneficial if she spent a whole season just observing the site. She's got a few annual garden beds in, she's renovating the existing greenhouse that's there, but that it would be beneficial not to yet rush to judgment, you
Hmm.
know before
Yeah.
deciding on a space for that, because that's going to be pretty permanent once you put it in, the fence and the trees. And um, and it seems as if after our conversation, she's like, yeah, I think that is a really good idea, to not rush into the design has to be on paper and everything has to be perfect, but instead to give it some time. And I think, again, it's like that observation piece. They're just getting to know that site. All sorts of perennial flowers and bulbs are popping up, and it's exciting, you know, because she doesn't know what's on the property, but it's worth waiting. It's worth
Yeah.
waiting a season, if not two, until they make some, more permanent decisions.
And it lightens us, right? Because ultimately we don't have to be all the deciding all the time, right? You and you're helping her let the land as it's going to show up next year make some of the decisions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the way some of the trees grow, that what's happening with the wind, and the way she discovers happening with something that's going on in her neighbor's place, and then those things that right now are decisions that take time and energy, right? I've gotten very cherry, I guess, about um, how profligate I am with decision making. It takes my energy. I don't have infinite energy. And so if I say decisions are energy eaters, then I'm like, how can I create systems where decisions get made through time
Yeah.
and by other things than just me?
Mm-hmm.
And it's when she can do that, it's going to be a healthier system, and in a life too.
Yeah. And I think that that's the interesting thing too about, yeah, designing a life, or even, designing a, a permaculture design that, you know, for those with whom I work, where we come up with the site plan, you know, and I hand it to them, it's with the caveat that this is like a dynamic plan, right?
Right.
And that's what I actually struggle with in working with clients, that I'd much rather actually take them through the design process
Yeah.
rather than handing a site plan to someone. You know, site plans are really pretty and whatever, and they do give you a roadmap in terms of where you want to go. But if they're, you know, that's the difference between a landscape design and a permaculture design. If they're expecting that that's one and done, you know, that's not what it's about, you know, and that's not what the process is about. And that it's going to be a dynamic plan that will change over time. I guarantee you that you're not going to put in everything exactly as you see it on this page. If you do, you're not paying attention, probably.
Yeah.
Right.
That's making me think that there can, and I'll use the word should, but there can and should be this lovely interweaving of and her own knowledge and confidence, so that I think when people are clutching after plans or reassurances or answers or instant solutions, dopamine, right? It's because there is that strong sense of uncertainty and that strong sense of being at sea. and we clutch for something. And that there's a very lovely definition of resilience that says that it is the act of building a better boat while we are already at sea. And so if you can, at the same time, with new clients like this, or me with my people, that this understanding that every step we take towards this thing that we're working towards, we can be clear about the framework that we're working within, but that every step that we take is going to increase our horizon. Right? It's like climbing. When I'm climbing and there are holds that I can't see from below. And so I take a step up with a foot, and all of a sudden I can see a handhold that didn't even exist for me before. And then I can make new choices of how I'm going to move next, like a chessboard. So you can tell her, and hopefully, like you and I get really good at helping people believe this, right? Because this is trust. But believing that, you know, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, you are going to have new horizons of knowledge, new horizons of understanding of how things work beautifully together, that will let you make decisions that are so much more elegant and economical and health-giving. So you want future you to make these choices, right? You don't want you now to make these decisions. You're like, that person is amazing, right? They have got so much cool stuff going on inside, and they are gonna, at that point, they are gonna be right there with what's needed.
I love that.
And they want future you to be also making some of these choices, right? We're getting better at this all the time too. They're like, oh, like you can have me right now, but like 3 months, 6 months from now, we're going to be on fire. It doesn't stop.
Yeah, I like, in a way, how my business is starting to evolve to more of a guide on the side mentorship for certain clients, because
it feels so good.
Yeah, it is ultimately what you want, right? You want people to be, I know the word empowered has been overused, but that's essentially what you're doing, right? Is that they're interacting with their landscape. They're interacting, you know, they're observing themselves in that landscape, and they're a full participant of the design process. And you'll ultimately get a much better design, even just in working with you know, it's a couple, and just today, just in working with them and walking around the site, you could tell that they were, you know, and I was like, just sit with this idea for a while, you know, see how it strikes you. How would
Beautiful.
you imagine this, you know? And I think that that's, that approach is so much more how we function as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not how we've been socialized to function, but definitely how it's just a much more gentle, I think, approach to the design process.
I think we can take that as a sign of health in our practices.
Mm.
That the more we're doing that, the better. I mean, it will have an economic impact on our businesses, right? The more we're doing that, it is so often to jump in and
Mm-hmm.
design and save someone and solve the thing. But if we are maybe thinking of ourselves as soil, as really rich soil, that it doesn't matter what gets planted, right, in this garden,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's going to do beautifully. And it's a way that we can feed agency and self-trust in people. And ultimately there is nobody else who's going to be able to make these decisions for them, if that are going to be sustained, right? It's like telling someone what to plant, and without asking them, what do you spend most of your time and money on at the grocery store?
Mm-hmm.
What do you eat the most of?
Mm-hmm.
What do you open the fridge and grab,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what kinds of stuff is on your pantry shelves that has been there way too long because you never eat it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And those are such key things for us as sustainable gardeners, whether on like the tiniest scale out to ranches, right? That no one else can tell you, right, those things. And on the social level, it's the same, right? The extent to which we are basing our being and our choices on comparisons with other people, on then we are acting inefficiently, and it's sucking energy out that we could be using for all sorts of really cool things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there are a lot of, the resilience work for me is a lot of, it's a lot of, in a way, teaching people to walk through the wilderness and notice danger spots. Or notice spots where they're doing something that is costing energy that they might have right now, but if things shift, they won't have it. And that's not okay with me. I want them to be amazing in crisis. Yeah.
It's so interesting because I feel like just as a lot of people are relearning how to grow food, you know, that people don't know how to do that, how to connect to their food and their food system. I feel like we're also needing to learn how to be resilient human beings, because I think we've gotten away from our connection to food, we've gotten away from our connection to ourselves.
Yeah, because it's in times of well-being, it's abstract, right? That I think of resilience as a reservoir, right? We are the cup, and we are full or empty, and if we try to refill ourselves in crisis, it can happen, right? But sometimes when we're all full up, the idea of refilling doesn't make sense, right? We're like, I'm full and I'm always going to be full. So, I mean, it's probably for you too, you know, that in times of communal sufficiency, then there are people who are like, things are fine, I don't need to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
And in times when we are closing our eyes to insufficiencies elsewhere, right, to unhealthy systems, unhealthy ecosystems, and if we're not willing to look at where those things are attached to policy, attached to inequity, attached to prejudice, that is like saying, oh, the whole system's, fine. And then we find out that that's not the way it works. And that's what's happening right now.
Right.
And so people are waking up to complex transport systems for our food. Like, oh, that's a thing. Or the fact that there are 43 pieces to this piece of technology, and some of them are available now and some aren't, right? To me, all of this is this invitation to understand, to achieve a new level of seeing, that we can then start to really work with all of these systems, instead of creating them out of whole cloth and hoping they last.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. If anything, I think, the work that I do and you do is certainly just going to become more and more relevant as we navigate past this, because this is not the end. I mean, that we've been going through all sorts of ecological crises and climate change. It's just that a lot of people,
we have a backlog.
Yeah, we have a massive backlog.
Yeah. I really love how our work touches, because, in fact, I'm just going to touches, because I love thinking about how, for example, you could have someone who is an amazingly knowledgeable gardener in terms of what the land needs, right? And if those things are not being mirrored in how they treat their relatives, in how they are when they go to work, then you have this untapped knowledge base and all of these skills that are going straight into the land, but which are, all they need is just to go and start playing with them here, right? Or vice versa. There are people all around us who are really beautifully emotionally intelligent, right? And who are doing amazing work in the community, and who are righting wrongs, and who are adding health in all of these great ways. And then they walk out into their gardens and they do the way they've always been taught, and that is monoculture, and that is wasteful, and that is, right? And so I love holding it that nobody's starting from scratch here.
Yeah.
Right? That we are doing beautifully healthy things in some arenas of our lives, and a lot of us just need to do a full 360-degree scan and say, I'm amazing at this. How can I translate this into our food systems that go into my family? How can I translate this into who walks through the door at my office? Right? How can I translate this and acknowledge the skills we already have, and in each other when we see them, and invite each other to take all of these skills into places where we have blind spots.
And that's, again, I mean, it's the whole person. Yeah. And I do think that, the garden is such a teacher in that way. And it kind of exposes all the issues that you do have, as well. There are so many opportunities for it to be a teacher, and then for you then to take those practices in other parts of your life. Yeah, I love that. But again,
your land is not lying to you.
Right.
My sheep are not lying to me. My husband races homing pigeons that fly home 600 miles in a day, right? And they show up and they're like, after 12 hours in the air, they show up and they're like landing on the landing board and spinning. Like that level of health, that tells him what he's doing, not vice versa. Not him saying, oh, I'm doing all of these things for my pigeons, and then what, right? So if we can give ourselves that level of honesty, right, that for everything that is less healthy, we can say to ourselves, this is showing an imbalance somewhere. This is a window, right? And it's not blaming me, and it's not that's not an excuse to add drama. Like drama is a great, what would be a great analogy for drama? Drama is a noxious weed, right? So the more noxious weeds, the more noxious weeds. And it's an indicator of soil imbalances. It's an indicator of things that are not there that could be added, that could be supported, that could be, right? And so we can say, well, I am dining on drama every day, right? And it's not okay in this part of my life, but boy, yeah, this is great, right? I'll take it over here. And say, you know what, maybe that's a place where I can take some of these skills and transfer them over here. Because in a place of real health, we don't need drama.
Right. Yeah. Like we don't need not in a place of real ecosystem health. Yeah. And I think
and maybe there's some, right? There can be noxious, there can be a few, right? And that's fine.
Yeah.
But you don't have this overtaking in a way that is also squeezing out the things we really want in life.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, things in moderation. And I mean, it's the same when you're dealing with a pest or a disease in your garden. It's not just about that pest or disease. It's about something's out of balance in the whole system. And so I think the more that we can kind of remind ourselves of that on a personal, on a community-wide, and on a landscape level, the healthier and more resilient we're going to be.
Where can I add health? Might be just a really great watchword for here. Here I am in quarantine. Here I am in crisis. Here I am with inequity visible that has never been visible. Where am I, and where can I add health today?
Yeah.
And if you have ended your day and you can answer that question,
well, thank you so much, Lorca. I feel like this was such a rich conversation. We didn't know where it was going to go, but here we ended up here.
Yeah.
So for people, how can they get a hold of you if they're curious about your work and what you do? What's the best way to learn about you?
Right now, the best way is you can go to my website, which is my name, lorcasmetana.com. And right now I'm pointing people towards a podcast that just came out this week. And it is called For the Love of Climbing. And it's the latest episode, the newest episode, and called A Hunger for Joy. And it is one of my most favorite things I've done. And it is not about climbing. It's about this. Yeah,
that's great. Yes.
So those are two good places to start.
Yeah, and I will include links to those as well, so that people can have easy access. But thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me. I know it was a long time coming. We've been trying to do this for a while. And maybe in the future, we're hoping that we can do a live resilience day-long event when people can gather more comfortably again. So stay tuned for that as well. So thanks so much for agreeing to do this with me. And and thanks everybody for listening in.
Thank you. So good.